Name of the speech is A History of Hillary's Charitable Work. Please welcome our president, Mr. Erik Wiese.
You're welcome. I know some of you have been wondering what I really feel about the coming election. You've been saying to yourself, what does Erik really think? He's been keeping it to himself. So tonight I've decided to throw away my prior subtlety and embrace the moment. So did you hear recently that Hillary came out with her Spotify list? It included Katy Perry, Kelly Clarkson, and Jennifer Lopez. And Bill Clinton came out with his to-do list at the same time. It also included Katy Perry, Kelly Clarkson, and Jennifer Lopez. Now let's move to what this misogynist and his enabler have been doing for the past several years. This is fairly detailed, so I decided to put this very detailed analysis together for you. It's a little bit informal, and I was going to make it look a little bit fancier, but Kiefer hasn't shown up the last couple days, so I had to do this myself. Now, let's go back to the days when the governor of Arkansas was Billary, or Bill Clinton. I've consolidated Bill and Hillary up here with this Billary notation. What is interesting is all the things that Billary has done for other people are in black, all the things that Diamond Fields have done for Billary are in red, and all the things that Frank Gustra has done for them is in brown. Hopefully this will all show up on tape since it's pretty far away from you all. But Billary has this thing called the Clinton Foundation that we're all aware of. The chairman of the board is a gentleman by the name of Bruce Lindsay. And back when he was the governor of Arkansas, there was this thing called the Diamond Fields organization that was headed by a gentleman called Raymond Bull. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to put a mine in on public land that was in Arkansas, that was owned by the state of Arkansas. In order to be able to mine diamonds, they needed to convert it from public land into private land. They needed to get a concession from the state of Arkansas. Well, good news. Guess who's the governor of Arkansas? Billary is. So, a gentleman by the name of Jim Blair ends up being a broker for this transaction. I call him a broker even though I'm a broker, but there's nothing at all having to do between his job and my job. You see, I actually create value. This guy trades in influence in exchange for getting a portion of the profits. So Jim Blair pays off Billary by giving $1,000 into a bank account that is an option. If any of you are familiar with options, you have the option to buy a stock at a certain level, but when it goes super, super high, you make a killing on that stock. It doesn't happen very often. Most of the time you lose your $1,000. Well, Jim Blair set up an account for Hillary, and that account amazingly went up. And so $100,000 was made in Hillary's account for money that Jim Blair loaned her. Now, Jim Blair could have set up 40 accounts, could have loaned her $1,000 for each account. The other 39 could have probably lost all of their money. But the one that made $100,000, he gives to Hillary. So for $100,000 in cattle futures, oh, and I should also mention that when this Diamond Fields gets up and going, of course there's lots of extra diamonds around. Who do you think shows up with a 3.5 carat diamond ring at the inauguration of Bill? Hillary has it. 3.5 carat diamond ring. She's meanwhile not making any money supposedly, and Bill's hardly making any money as governor. Where are they going to get money for a 3.5 carat diamond ring? So Bruce Lindsay, who is the chairman of the board of the Clinton Foundation, he's providing legal services to Raymond Bull. They approved the mining concession on the state park. Now, who's this Frank Gustra guy? Frank Gustra is a Canadian miner. He knows how to mine diamonds, he knows how to mine uranium, he knows how to mine everything. And he has a 12,000 square foot home in Vancouver and 60,000 shares in Diamonds Fields. So he puts together this thing called the Clinton Gustra Sustainable Growth Initiative. This is similar to the Clinton Foundation. It's another not-for-profit that you can throw a bunch of money in, and then it ends up going somewhere that nobody really knows where it goes. But on the next page, I'm going to show you that it all goes right to Billary. All the money that's put in here goes right to Billary. So in addition for Frank giving free use of the corporate jet, this is a nice jet. It's a gold-plated jet. It's got laboratory urinals that are in gold. And Frank lets him use it anytime he wants to go on any fundraiser, or go visit dictators all over the world, or have a secretary come and join him on the plane. Anything that Bill wants, he gets from Frank Goostra, including money put into this Clinton Goostra Sustainable Initiative. This is just the first page, guys. Now we go to page 2. Now this has a lot more lines, and you can see why this is not normally something that people talk about on television. Because you see the mainstream media is shilling for Hillary, but also their average person only has an attention span, due to MTV, of about 60 seconds. They don't come to Toastmasters Club like you and I, so that they can develop long-term attention. Okay? So now here's Billary working with a Frank Goostra again, and now a new dictator enters this scene called Nursultan Nazarbayev. And this guy is a dictator in Kazakhstan. He is a massive human rights violator. He wins election every time he runs by 90% of the vote. You know what's interesting? He's a good friend of Putin. He once called and bragged to Putin how he won 90% of the vote, and Putin said, "Only 90%?" That was a joke, but it's true. All right, so the people who run against him, right before they ran for election, their houses burned down, and there was a lot of ballot stuffing, and their headquarters burned up. Yeah, you know, it was all a coincidence. This is a nasty guy. Major human rights violations. He likes to torture people too. He couldn't have a kid normally, so he took Mrs. Kazakhstan and basically raped her and got himself a son, but called it a test tube baby in order to save her virtue. Nasty, nasty guy. So what this guy really wants is the world to like him. All really nasty guys like the world to like him. And that's where Billary comes in, because Bill likes to go and tell everybody how fabulous his friends are. And he will publicly tell everybody that this person's not a dictator, doesn't commit arson or human rights violations, and deserves a prize. One of the prizes that he made sure that this person got is an OSCE support. Hillary is in charge of basically like a Nobel Peace Prize that's designed in America. It's supposed to tell everybody how wonderful you are when it comes to human rights. She was on this committee hating all of the dictators in the world until this guy showed up. Then she decided this guy must be great. I will show you later why she changed her mind on why this guy must be great, and why this guy ended up then becoming head of a human rights organization for the world as a payback. Another thing Hillary was in a position to do was make sure $110 million in public money, that's United States tax dollars, was paid to Nursultan Nazarbayev, and it was called non-proliferation funds. So, in other words, because he has weapons of mass destruction, he has uranium mines, she's making sure $110 million is given to him in a block grant to take care of making sure that uranium doesn't fall into the hands of terrorists. And he's welcome to do with the $110 million whatever he wants. He could hire some guards, he could hire them to go commit arson, he could go on vacation, he can do whatever he wants with $110 million. That's your tax dollars, my tax dollars. I don't think you pay taxes, but if you did, those would be your tax dollars too. Tax dollars being spent to keep this dictator in business. Those are what Hillary and Bill gave him. Oh, and one other thing. They made sure that in exchange, a mining concession was given to Frank Goostra. Because these guys can go all over the place in his jet, they get to go all over the place and introduce themselves, and especially Hillary. Hillary is a powerful person as Secretary of State. She gets to see whoever she wants all around the world. Well, there was a lot of people who wanted this mining concession, a lot of companies, but they made sure their friend Frank Goostra got it. Frank Gustra is good at diamonds. He's never ever run a uranium mine. Why would he end up with a concession? Because Billary made sure it happened. That was what they did to make sure the mining concession went that way. Oh, does anyone remember who Mark Rich is? Mark Rich was the big scandal at the end of Clinton's second term. On the day that Clinton left office, he pardoned Mark Rich. Mark Rich owed the United States government $48 million in back taxes because he was doing business with the Iranians when we told him that the Iranians were under sanctions and he wasn't supposed to be doing business with the Iranians. So he actually, if he had been caught and not hiding from Americans trying to find him in the FBI, he would have gone to jail for 325 years. So Bill Clinton let him off the hook, gave him a pardon. That's another $48 million in American tax money down the drain after Clinton pardoned him on his last day in office. So why would he do that to Mark? Because Mark is basically acting as a broker with Sergei Kurzin in making this deal happen. Frank wouldn't have known about all of this stuff going on except that he had Sergei Kurzin, a Russian nuclear physicist, verify that there really was uranium there. And Mark Rich, as a financier, he could bribe the smaller officials to make it happen. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, in exchange for getting $48 million in back taxes taken off, he donated $1 million to the Democratic Party, $100,000 to Hillary Clinton's Senate bid. She needed fundraising in order to get elected as senator, and $450,000 for the library, the Clinton Library over in Arkansas. That's bribery, gentlemen. That's bribery right there. So this deal happens. What does Frank Gustra get out of it? His mining concession is called Eurasia Energy. Now Eurasia Energy ends up taking all of the uranium out of Kazakhstan, and I'm sure kicks back some to this dictator, because that's the way it works. The dictators are getting enriched. There's some Swiss bank account somewhere with a portion of those funds. But enough money is flowing to Frank Gustra that he has 3 million shares in Eurasia. Here's some other people who work under Frank Gustra. Robert Cross, 500,000 shares. Ian Telfer, 2.2 million shares. Ian Telfer is affiliated with both Eurasia Energy and Uranium One, and also Frank Holmes. So of these three people who work for these organizations under Frank Holmes donated $500,000 to the Clinton Foundation. Ian Telfer, who had 2.2 million in shares, he donated $3 million to the Clinton Foundation. Robert Cross, who has 500,000 shares, gets rich, and he also donates, I think, on the next page. So with Frank Gustra being the big beneficiary and having 3 million shares in this mining concession, he donates $31.3 million in 2005 to the Clinton Foundation. And he promises 100 million more. 100 million, guys. This is not graft on a small level. This is graft on a huge level. Bonnie and Clyde were lucky to get $1 million every time they went in and broke into a bank. These guys are getting 31.3 million with a promise of 100 million more. They made so much money they hired Billy Crystal and Bon Jovi and Tom Cruise and Robin Williams to do fundraising parties. This guy hires all of Hollywood, who's in cahoots with this whole thing. Big Hollywood, big government, and big journalism. They're all in cahoots in order to make the Clinton Foundation lots of money. Now, here's where it gets super interesting, because right now, Eurasia Energy has not gone public. Where does the money come from for all these millions of dollars? Well, when you do an IPO, that's where you really make the money. You get a lot of other people who come in and buy your company and take it public. And in that IPO, Robert Disbrow, who's a banker who handled the IPO, and Paul Reynolds, who also handled the IPO, donated $5 million each to the Clinton Foundation. Because it was so lucrative for them to make this money, and it would never have happened except that Billary made sure the mining concession went to their friends and buddies down here, Frank Gustra, The same people who made the diamond fields happen in the previous place. And all this money goes back to the Clinton Foundation. Now, but the Clinton Foundation is a private foundation that helps people, right? Right? Isn't that what we've all been taught? It helps people. It goes to the world and handles HIV and tries to get malaria, and that's only 7% of the money that goes to the Clinton Foundation is actually spent on helping all of their pet causes. The rest of it goes where? Why don't we ask Chelsea? Chelsea works for the Clinton Foundation. She makes $900,000. $900,000 a year. Just working for the Clinton Foundation. What could you possibly do just coming out of college only a couple years ago that would make you worth $900,000 a year? Well, let's ask Wasserman. You guys remember Wasserman, Deborah Wasserman, who just got evicted from the Democratic National Congress because she made sure that the Bernie supporters were left out in the cold and that Hillary would win by gaming the whole system in Hillary's favor? Deborah Wasserman was fired as Democratic National Committee Chairman, and she immediately the next day went to work for who?
The Clinton Foundation.
The Clinton Foundation. The Clinton Foundation is a payoff machine for all the people who break laws for Billary. That's what they do with a lot of their money when they're not flying around the world in gold-plated urinal jets. They're paying off all the corruption everywhere. This is where we go from bribery to treason. Ready? Maybe that's better. All right, so the Russian reset. Do you remember Hillary coming up with that stupid little red button that she couldn't even get named correctly in Russian? It was a reset button. They needed a reset button because, if you recall, Russia had invaded Georgia. Russia had invaded Georgia under the Bushes in 2008. And so in order to give them the ability to do business with Russia, they needed to give them a 123 agreement. Now the 123 agreement is a non-proliferation treaty agreement. And essentially what it does is it normalizes commercial relations between us and Russia. It essentially says we're no longer going to treat you as an enemy, we're going to treat you as a business partner. This was incredibly important in order for Putin to be able to do what he is going to do, what I'm now going to relate. Putin wants uranium. He knows that we are afraid of it. We're afraid of nuclear reactors. We don't necessarily want it. And yet we have a lot of uranium in the United States. We know Obama is trying to get people off uranium. So he said, I'll go buy it. I'm going to sell it to the Indians, who are going to put in about 100 nuclear reactors. I'm going to sell it to the Chinese, who are going to, in the next several years, put in 500 nuclear reactors. How do I get it? How do I get it? Well, you remember what I showed you on the previous page. Asia ended up having an IPO and ended up being Uranium One. He wants to buy Uranium One because Uranium One has 50% of all the United States uranium reserves. Uranium One, which is owned by Frank Gustra, has bought 50% of the uranium reserves in the entire United States. So Putin pays $300 million for it to buy our uranium. Now, how credible is our nuclear deterrent going to be when we don't have uranium to stockpile our nuclear weapons? We don't have it anymore. Doesn't that make nuclear war more likely? Right now we have what's called MAD, mutually assured destruction. We prevent them from bombing us first because they know in a first strike they're only going to take out 90% of our nuclear missiles. The remaining 10% would nuke Russia. They don't want to be nuked, so they don't nuke us first. What's going to happen if the 10% that are remaining don't have uranium? And we haven't had uranium to replenish it because uranium does wear out. It makes nuclear war more likely. And if you guys don't understand that, go look at how World War I started. Germany invaded France because they were afraid that if they didn't invade France first, Russia was going to invade them. Wars start, world wars start, because you're afraid your enemies are going to get together and your deterrence effect is going to be wiped out. It happens, guys. So, in order to get Uranium One and 50% of the uranium output, guess who has to approve it? It's a strategic material. It's a strategic resource. The United States is not going to let anyone, especially Russia, our arch enemy, come in and buy it unless somebody like the Secretary of State approves it. And Hillary is sitting on a committee that could have vetoed this, and it would have been kicked up to Obama. But she didn't veto it. She rubber stamped it. Why would she rubber stamp 50% of our uranium reserves being sold to Putin, her best friend and buddy? Well, here's the reason. $3.3 million was just given over to the Clinton Foundation from this vehicle called Salida, which is all owned by the Russian State Atomic Nuclear Agency. You see, they think if they hide it behind a couple different corporations, people aren't going to be resourceful enough to find it. Or if they do find it, they're not going to be good enough about explaining it, so that there's not going to be any outrage in America for what is demonstrably treason. Well, let's get Bill into this too, because if $3.3 million to the Clinton Foundation isn't enough, there's a company called RenCap that's also owned by Putin. Let's pay him a $500,000 speaking fee. That sounds reasonable to you, isn't it? It's not bribery if it's called a speaking fee, right? Don't we make $500,000 every time we go out and speak? I mean, aren't we worth it for an hour's worth of work? Yeah. Sure we are. Sure we are. So it can't possibly be bribery. But if you say, well, obviously it is bribery, then this constitutes treason. For money being paid by our archenemy Putin, we're allowing uranium reserves to flow to Putin. And there was supposed to be some guarantee that the uranium wouldn't be brought out of America, that it'd only be used in American reactors. Those are just details. We don't have to pay attention to details. How many times has Hillary promised things aren't going to happen and they do happen? She promised that there was not going to be any exporting of these materials. And you know what that promise was worth? Nothing. Zero. Just like she promised, and every single foreign donation to the Clinton Foundation was going to be disclosed, that it would be pure transparency. We would all know exactly who contributed to the Clinton Foundation. How long do you think that promise lasts? Thousands and thousands of contributions were made, and nobody knows what happened to them. Because she didn't disclose them, like she promised she would. So, why do you think 33,000 emails disappeared? Do you think maybe that documents some of this stuff even more than I've already done it? There's a great book out there called Clinton's Cash. This is all from Clinton's Cash. I have it if you guys want it. I left it right out there. If you guys want to see the amount of documentation that went into everything that I've said, it's like 30 pages. And it's not just from right-wing alternative, right-wing news organizations like Breitbart and Drudge Report, which I watch all the time. No, it's actually from stuff like the New York Times, the New York Post. I mean, even liberal rags like the New York Times are documenting this stuff. Can you believe that? It's not. So why don't people care? Why don't people understand what's going on? Why are they willing to vote in this person who's so corrupt? And you remember when I talked about this Clinton SCI fund that was on the first page? That's just a conduit to Billary. This guy who makes out over here made $1,250,000 donations, and it all just went to Billary. I mean, it's everybody who has to deal with them ends up making contributions to their foundation or in speaking fees. And now we're about ready to vote him back into office. I don't know what to say, but I'll end with a joke. Did you guys hear that recently Chelsea gave birth? And Bill decided that he wanted to be a good grandfather. So he's been around feeding the baby, cleaning the baby, making sure the baby had everything they needed, and personally interviewing about 100 nannies. Mr. Toastmaster.